Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maureen O'Connor from Quilters Heaven in Northbrook, Illinois, and I am the Opinionated Quilter. Today's episode, number 114, is how to prevent a bad pattern from causing you a quilting disaster. Please stay tuned for the winner of the Geometric Fun quilt top and the announcement of this week's giveaway. Before we get to the episode, I'd like to share with you the scarecrow behind me. You've seen this before, pieces of it before. I did remake the pumpkin. I made it narrower, and I also made it taller to try to fill in this space up to the hand a little more full. In addition, I wasn't going to put any leaves in. I wasn't really fond of Lori Holt's leaves, so I wasn't going to make them, but there was just too much white space. So I did make some here. This is Lori's leaf that was in the pattern, but I also added these maple leaves, which I've made into things before. It was originally a quilt maker pattern that's been reshown over the years many times. It's an all-time favorite quilt maker pattern. But I used Deb Tucker's instructions from her Pickets and Quickets technique sheet, and it just makes it really easy to make. So when I make this pattern, I always use Deb Tucker's techniques. In addition, I had way too much white space up here. So I ended up deciding to put in a bee. I couldn't decide if I wanted a butterfly, a bee, or a dragonfly. And I decided on the bee. And all I did to do that was I found this image on the internet. I think it was on Pinterest. And I just copied it. And then I foundation paper pieced the bee, and I really like it. I think it turned out good. So I'm happy. It does need another little border. It is still too wide for me for the space that I wanted to fit it in, but I like it and it will go somewhere, just not the original space that I thought. And again, just a reminder, you can take somebody's quilt pattern and totally change it up and make it your own. Okay, let's get to the episode. A bad pattern. And I put in quotes, bad pattern, because I am not talking about patterns that have construction methods that I disagree with. This is things that are really wrong. And common issues are incorrect cutting instructions. Just in the past couple weeks, I've had so many customers and one of my staff tell me that they had a bad pattern. And incorrect cutting instructions is one of the most often that I see. In the one that my staff member had, she told her to cut 1.5-inch strips, but it should have been 2-inch strips. So she cut up her whole yard of fabric and then wouldn't work in the pattern that she was doing. Another issue is incorrect fabric requirements, and this can be too much fabric or too little fabric. Usually it's too much fabric. And it brings me back to the days my mother was a garment sewer, and we would be in Marshall Field's fabric area. And before she would tell the clerk how much fabric to cut, she'd pull out the pattern, lay it out, and they told me to buy 3 yards, and I only need 2 7/8. So oftentimes they tell you to buy too much. But sometimes they don't have you buy enough. One of my customers was in and she said, I can't see how I can get this many pieces out of these 13 fat quarters. And when we looked at it, she needed 18 fat quarters. And when she called the writer of the pattern, she bought it on Etsy, she said, well, you need 18 fat quarters. And she said, but your pattern says 13 fat quarters. She said, well, no, it's 18. But it said 13 on her pattern. And she was miffed. Of course, you can always buy 5 more, but she'd already selected her 13. She was ready to go. and it bothered her. So in this case, she's not going to make the full size that she had wanted to make. She's just going to make as much as she can make with the 13 that she has. The other issue I see is incorrect unit measurements. I always think as you put together a quilt pattern that you should say this unit measures this and this. And one of my favorite designers, you know, she's not writing now, Trudy Hughes, has this book, Quilts to Fit Beds. And in her book, and I've made this quilt several times, so I actually have the correct measurement written in it. This book is so loved, the pages are all falling out of it. Here is a flying geese unit in her book. And it says it should measure 4 inches by 5.5. Well, we all know that flying geese units are, the width is twice the height. So that cannot be a correct measurement. You need to determine then which one is right. And as I looked at the cutting instructions, the 5.5 was the correct width, which would mean would be 5 once you take off the seam allowance. And so if it's 5, the height has to be 2.5, which would mean 3. So this unit should measure 3 by 5.5. So, you know, people make mistakes. It's just something that happens, but you need to be able to look at your pattern and see if things make sense. So when you're deciding to buy a pattern, the things that I think you should look for are good pressing directions. Now, pressing directions don't matter if you're a pressing open person. I only press open when I need to, so I like pressing directions to nest my seams. And if they don't give me pressing directions, I figure them out before I press. Or sometimes I press in the wrong direction and have to reverse it. Look for patterns that have pictures or clear diagrams. If there's not a single good photograph or a single good diagram, it's probably going to be very hard to follow. Mentioned unit measurements before. I think that's important in a good pattern. And the other thing I have found is that there are some patterns. Derek Lockwood, who has written many patterns, and I made one of his that is absolutely one of my favorite, but it was just a beast to get through. It had so many extra words that were meaningless. It was just more to go through than you really need to go through. So what you really want are clear, concise instructions without any extraneous stuff you don't need. So how do we prevent badly written patterns from causing us a quilting disaster? Give me 1 second. I'm going to switch out the boards. First, read your pattern. Sometimes you'll see things right away. A perfect example is this pattern. It's from Robert Kaufman. And Robert Kaufman is a fabric maker. Be especially aware of patterns that come from fabric companies. Very oftentimes, they've never been made. They've only been written, and a picture of a computer-generated diagram is what's on the cover of the pattern. It's not an actual quilt that's been made and tested. So this pattern read that you needed 16 fat quarters, and it said cut 10 2-inch strips from each fat quarter. You will get 170 strips, of which you will use 165. Even my math challenged viewers will know that 16 times 10 does not equal 170. They have since corrected that, but in the meantime, it was such a glaring error that I cannot believe that some editor of somewhere would have not caught that. But it actually got printed out and people downloaded and tried to make the pattern without enough strips. The next thing is make a practice block. And in my example of my staff member who cut her strips at 1.5, and then she was matching them up with 2-inch strips. If you made started one practice block, here's a 1.5-inch square, here's a 2-inch strip. If you look at the diagram in the pattern, this little square does not match the top and bottom of your strip. You would have noticed immediately that that was not right, was not going to work, and you would not have cut up your whole yard of fabric into the wrong size. Now, sometimes, as in this pattern, it has you take pieces from all different fat quarters or all different pieces of fabric, and it seems daunting to make a practice block with the fabric that you're actually going to use. That does sometimes happen. That's when you pull out that fabric you bought 30 years ago that you have no idea why you bought it, and it's sitting in your stash pile that you see no use for in the future. Cut those up and make a practice block with them. And I cannot emphasize enough, never cut out a whole quilt without at least one practice block. I like to make 4 so I can see if there's any additional pressing directions that I need to see, but at least make 1. And again, there are really good pattern writers out there. Atkinson Designs is at the top of my list. Lori Holt writes good directions. Elizabeth Hartman writes good directions. And in those kind of patterns where you're just making, some leaves, or you're making one giraffe, you probably aren't going to make a practice block. But in those cases, it's just one unit of the quilt. It's not you're making 90 of something and you cut it all out and find out it's wrong. The next thing, and this is the last thing, is if you're unsatisfied, ask for your money back. One of my customers who had just really badly written directions, there wasn't anything particularly wrong with it except for that it skipped several steps. She had bought it from the Fat Quarter Shop, and she called the Fat Quarter Shop, and Kimberly reimbursed her money. And I think that's the only way you're going to get people to not sell really badly written patterns, if you ask for your money back. So I think that's worth considering doing, even though you might think, well, am I being really cheap? I think we want to weed out some of the real bad ones and try to promote the good patterns. So that's really it on bad patterns. So now let's get to the fun part, the reveal of the winner of the Geometric Fun Quilt. The winner of the Geometric Fun Quilt is V. Harvey 5982. Please email me at quiltersheaveninc@gmail.com with your address information so that I can get this out to you. This week's giveaway, I'm calling it heron, and I'm really not good on birds, but I'm going to call it that. If it's not a heron, it's the name for this giveaway. And this is a big one. I can't really see the whole thing, but it is large and it is pretty. And it is 56 inches wide, 76 inches tall. To enter, be sure you subscribe, like this video, and comment. And in your comment, be sure you put in the word heron. Now, one other note before we go. I will be attending Bernina University next week, and I will not be able to get out a video. So we will not have a video drop on Monday, June 24th, and we will resume on Monday, July 1st. So the winner of the Heron quilt will not be announced till Monday, July 1st. So that is it for now. Until next time, happy sewing.